So many moms feel stuck and isolated, like they've got to keep it all together and can't say how hard it really is. On Let's Get Real, we talk about the real stuff, motherhood, mental health, and everything in between, so you don't feel like you have to carry it alone anymore. Because in order to heal, we have to get real. If you're feeling overwhelmed, grab the Overwhelmed Moms Guide. It's totally free and made to help you feel like yourself again. The link is in the show notes. Let's jump in. So many of us reach adulthood without ever being taught how to feel our emotions or handle conflict, especially in the relationships that matter most. We try to just communicate better, stay calm, or avoid being reactive. But without real tools, we end up repeating the exact same cycles that we grew up with. Parenting, partnership, and daily stress reveal triggers we didn't even know we had, leaving us wondering, why does this keep happening and how do I actually change it? Today, we're joined by Davina Hehn, a therapist, coach, and podcast host who specializes in teaching emotional regulation and conflict skills to individuals, couples, and parents. In her training, Davina realized that most people were never taught the basics of navigating anger, communicating under pressure, or managing emotional intensity. Now, through her programs and her podcast, Shift Talking, she helps people break generational patterns, stop reacting from old wounds, and develop real, actionable skills for staying grounded, especially during the moments that matter most. Davina, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited to explore this topic with you on just emotions and parenting, the triggers that happen, and the tools and framework that you use to help us in everyday life. So thank you for being here.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure. I oftentimes refer to parenting as a bait and switch. So I'm always ready to talk about things very transparently, very vulnerably about this experience. It's pretty gnarly.
Yes, it is. And that's hilarious. That's the term that you use. I'm like, it's actually pretty accurate. The expectations we have versus reality, it looks pretty different a lot of the times. Before we dive into the tools and the framework that you teach, can you share what first made you realize that most of us weren't actually taught how to feel, communicate, or handle conflict in a healthy way?
I definitely didn't. I went to grad school. I got my master's in forensic psychology, and I was still struggling within this in my now marriage before my husband and I got married. And once we became parents, I started experiencing these very visceral amounts of rage that I just never knew that I was capable of, that I was the provider for people who were experiencing that. And while I could understand it from a more clinical perspective, I couldn't quite relate from an interpersonal or even intrapersonal way. And so as things progressed, I really started to see that had I not had the schooling, the training, the understanding of how mental health works, how to seek it properly, I would have suffered so much more within it. And that's really where I converted my court-ordered anger management practice that it was at the time into something that is more of an emotional literacy for parents, for partners, for all of us who just weren't taught these skills earlier.
Oh, that's so good. And I relate to a lot of what you're saying of just experiencing a lot of big emotions, but then feeling terrified of them because I didn't know how to navigate them or what to do with them. And I think you're spot on with how much those get magnified in parenting and with kids who they're not born with boundaries. They're like, they're pushing every button that you didn't realize that you had. And so being able to use your own experience and go in and then operate now as a guide, helping other parents and people navigate these emotions that come up because there's a reason for it. There's things that are connected to that. And I think it's interesting what you're saying that you went from, so you were a court-ordered anger management type of counselor. Is that what you would consider? Okay. And then moving and shifting to it's like, what's the difference, would you say, from that approach to what you're doing now?
So originally, anger management has become a very clinical, criminalized kind of approach, right? And so we tend to find people who are at the tail end of an ultimatum, or quite literally being ordered to do this through the court or through their work, through probation, whatever that might be. And the traditional anger management model is so much more about repression, about hyper control, about elimination of anger. And where I've been able to evolve this into is more so harnessing it, using it as our compass, helping us understand the message that it's giving us so that we can actually trust it and not only understand it, but convert it into change, into boundary, into advocacy, empowerment. So everything went from staying more very clinical, very out of a workbook page each time we had a session, into something that morphed into a full embodiment of the work. And again, an acceptance and appreciation for anger and what it's trying to tell me, instead of just this like one letter away from danger thing to be fully avoided.
Yeah, that's significant and such a powerful shift, because that's a very different way of approaching anger, going from it's called anger management because that's what I'm thinking of. It's managing that emotion of anger when it comes up. Like I have to and it's almost like using a ton of energy to try and keep it locked and loaded, which then can also make it worse and come out in these other ways or explode even more, I would think, given the right set of circumstances, to instead of like shifting, like you're talking about, where it can flow and come up and be used as something that you said, like, is trying to communicate to us, that's meant to flow, and it's not meant to try and like be squeezed into this tiny box. So what would you say is a misconception that people have around anger, and why does it tend to keep them stuck?
We're told that we're not supposed to experience it. That like if we're experiencing it, there's something wrong, almost maybe with us, that we're too sensitive, that we're making it too big of a deal to just let it go. And there is this really big shift that happens when we embrace it, when we give ourselves permission to actually experience it, that we go from saying, wow, I shouldn't be angry, into, oh, wow, I'm angry. What do I need to do about this? What is this trying to show me? And especially as a wife and as a mother and as a woman, there was so much of that traditionally women aren't encouraged to experience anger. There is this very strong divide between the gender roles of men only really being allowed to experience anger and happiness, and women only really allowed to experience happiness and maybe some sadness. So if men experience any sort of other emotion that's more vulnerable, then they are weak, they're a pussy, they're beta. And if a woman experiences anger or expresses it, then she is a beta. And there was so much of that misconception around what we're allowed, quote unquote, to feel versus what we are wired to experience, that then has to be converted into a radical acceptance, a radical appreciation of anger, what it's showing me, and how to convert it away from aggression and more so into advocacy.
Oh, wow. The word or the phrase that you just used, the advocacy, and advocating for change, because I think that's something that you can explain more of. I think of seeing anger in that way, of like, this is actually trying to tell me that something isn't right and there is change that's needed. Or like, I'm just thinking as a parent, I can't tell you how many times, particularly like last night, I was on the phone and I'm trying to have this conversation, and I'm not on the phone often at all. I don't typically have the time for that, but I'm on the phone trying to have this important conversation, and my husband's gone and my kids are constantly coming in, and I'm getting very angry because I'm like, I'm trying to focus. I cannot multitask very well to save my life. And this is a conversation that matters to me. So as they're coming in, and they're young, they're like 3 and 5. And no matter how many times I've told them, like, I need you to give me space. Do not come in while I'm on the phone. It's constantly happening. So I'm feeling this rage, this anger, and it's starting to come out in that like rageful feeling. Yep. And so as I was thinking, I couldn't even think of it in the moment because there's so much happening at that time. But afterwards, later last night, I was like, what was that? Why was I so angry? And part of it was like reflecting on, oh yeah, so much for me growing up was constantly having my boundaries crossed, for like from parents. And so I was and that for me is very like, that's a triggering thing. Yeah. So I'm like, that causes a lot of anger because it's like, this is the thing that matters to me. My boundaries are being crossed. Here, my kids are doing that, and they're not intentionally doing it. They're children. This is what they do. but like trying to reflect on where that's coming from. So I'm just wondering if you, like, in working with clients or all the work that you do, if you can expand a little further of really the gift of anger and how that can be used in the ways that you're describing as advocacy for change, or how else you typically use that with clients.
With your example is such a typical experience. It's something that we all go through quite literally daily, whether it's trying to have a conversation or cook dinner or fold laundry and get it put away within one smooth motion. That we're constantly having our goals impeded. We're constantly feeling stomped over and unimportant, small.
Yes.
And so much of parenting is self-sacrifice. Some of it is willing and some of it is just required. And every so often we might have these moments of finding this to be an injustice, finding this to be more than we expected it to be. And the constant nature of parenting will eventually get to us anyway. So when we start this work, because it is so abstract, because there are going to be so many different things that do kind of flare us up in the moment, sometimes it's hard for us to know really where to start. Each scenario that angers me might seem like a completely different issue, and it's harder to find the through line. So then we get a case of what I call the F-its, which is basically forget it. I'm not going to focus on any of it. I'm not going to do any of it. I'm just going to maintain the status quo because the idea of starting somewhere feels more confusing than starting anywhere.
Yes.
So where I constantly suggest people start is within the anger archetype quiz that I've created, where we really have like 5 versions of us that come up that are protecting something more vulnerable. And that can be the sentinel who is arguing for safety, protecting from danger. It can be the judge who is trying to protect fairness and fight against injustice. We have the commander who is trying to protect self-respect and respect from others. We have the exile, which is what I am, which has been the most common one so far, which is trying to protect belonging by flaring up from rejection.
Okay.
So each one of these things, by taking a simple 10-question quiz, we can see more where we fall within, what archetype am I living within. So then as we're going through the world, we don't need all of these tools. We don't need all of this like special skills yet. We just need to view the world through one of these lenses of, okay, something flared up within me. Is this my exile that's coming up to protect me? And is there a sense of rejection that I'm feeling here? For you, I would guess that there's within that scenario from last night, there's likely the commander who's feeling disrespected, who's feeling like your time isn't valuable, your space, your words, your needs for that distance isn't being valued. And also maybe a little bit of the judge, like this is an injustice. Like you go so far out of your way to make sure that your kids feel like their words matter to you, that you honor their boundaries when they give them to you. And there is this really obvious inequity between what you put in versus what you get up.
Yes, that's so accurate. I feel very seen right now.
Oh, good.
And understood. Like, yeah, that's what I go through.
Good. And this is the point, right? We are living within an information overload age where it seems like we need the most information in order to make any changes. But really, we just need a little bit of guidance to barely move that needle so that I can start flirting with the idea of maybe viewing myself in the world in a different way.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yes. I could see how even for that piece of if I can just be aware of that, like keeping that in mind of those are the 2 common types of anger that would come up for me. It will help to, like when I'm in a situation, which I'm sure will happen later today when I pick them up from school,
Totally.
Then it will help to notice like much earlier, okay, what is coming up and why? What is this connected to? Because so often we feel anger, we feel it, but we don't necessarily have the words to understand what it's trying to tell us. So I love that you even painted the picture of 5 different types of anger, because there is like specific language around each of those, even though it's the same broad emotion.
And I mean, it's so hard to pinpoint. The work is so abstract. And that's what makes it so easy for us to feel like we're failing in it. When I was, especially when my kids were younger and I was battling so much depression. My husband's drinking was outrageous. Our conflict was super high. And it was before we got to this point of separation and then choosing to rewrite the narrative of our marriage. He is now nearly 5 years sober. We've really been able to rewrite so much of our marriage and who we are at our core and how we perceive ourselves and each other. And when we were in the thick of it, when things were really dark and really scary and really uncertain, there were these times that even with all of the schooling and the knowledge and myself as this provider, I still needed me. I still needed someone who could help me see things in a way that I hadn't yet. And when we're in the thick of it and everything is so abstract and it feels like I'm failing back to back to back to back, it's so scary. And it can feel so lonely. And it feels like we are also definitely the only ones really experiencing this, because everyone knows that we experience it, but no one really talks about the fact that we experience it.
Right.
And that's why I created this framework that's much more simplistic. It's the reason why everything I do is very much back to basics with little bits of information over time, so that the ripples that become our awareness eventually become these waves that get us to shore. But at first it's so hard, and the expectation that I shouldn't experience it at all is what will likely cause it to flare up so much faster, because it's already impeding this expectation that I had to not have it at all. Yes. So then we focus on the fact that we had it. We focus on what we did with it that was likely really poor. And then we don't actually get to address the underlying issue that is so deeply valid and important, because we're just busy shaming and comparing ourselves anyway.
Yeah, exactly. That's the part of what I was thinking of when you're talking about this, is how easy it is, just because of the narrative around anger, of being like, I shouldn't experience this, especially as women. We talked about in our culture, that is an emotion that is so looked down upon, and it's not permissive. It's not permissible. So the shame that comes with that feeling, and then however we do respond or react from it, feeds this, like, it adds this weight of the layered feelings of just like, oh my gosh, there is something wrong with me. Why do I act like this? And shame further keeps us isolated and from talking about it, where we feel so shameful to even bring it up. And like, there's no way I could share this with somebody, because again, it's not talked about much. Yet being human, you are going to experience this. Nobody's not going to, unless they're just lying to themselves, because it is part of being human, and we're like dealing with everyday life. Like, we do experience that. So I think it's helpful to just to understand. And I like what you said about the ripples. It's a ripple effect. It doesn't have to be big, drastic changes, especially at first. It's these little shifts that really make a difference and then can lead to the bigger waves. That's such a great picture and analogy that you use. So I'm thinking of like these triggers that happen in parenting, and how often we do get triggered from our kids, especially when it comes to things we thought we have already dealt with. So how do old wounds resurface through our kids, and why is this so common?
When we're talking about either things that I've tried to work on in the past and I felt like I had a grasp on, or whether there were things that I didn't even realize affected me to this level, and now I'm having these replays of my own childhood and the comparison of the childhood that I had versus the childhood that I'm providing my kids. All of these things are going to come down to a lot of our nervous system recognition, our pattern recognition, that is our body's ability to assess for threats and then follow through with what we should do when that threat is perceived.
Yes. Wow.
So much of it is, one, understanding more of our neurochemistry, how things actually trigger in our brain, what chemicals end up getting dumped out when we do assess for this threat and detect a threat. And then understanding that so much more than just this behavioral defect. So much more than just this like regret of I lost it and I really wish I hadn't. It's so much more about understanding where anger triggers in the brain, what happens once it triggers, and then knowing how to safely address it next. But so much of this is going to come down to our brain being this very sophisticated yet very simplistic pattern recognition machine. And then trying to understand, reverse engineering our reactions into, okay, what I did with that was not cute, right? And if I were to kind of like put on our women detective hat that we're very good at doing, if I were to go and kind of like break that down, what was that? Where did that come from? What came up for me and what can I do about it? Instead of, why did I get so angry? Why am I such a bitch? Why am I ruining my children for their future? And if we can look at it through that way of understanding, if it's hysterical, it's historical. If I have a bigger reaction to something that I think is necessary in that moment, then what is this maybe telling me? What historical evidence did my body pick up on before I was even consciously aware of it? And when it comes to things that trigger us, our brain can perceive threats within a fifth of a second.
Wow.
It's faster than the blink of an eye. So before we're even consciously aware of what activated us, all we know is that we are. And so we lead agency, we tend to live within our reactions, we live more impulsively because that part of our body, of our brain is saying, hey, you're in danger, get out of it. We don't need our logical mind. We just need you to take some sort of action to get it done.
Yes.
Which is why last night when your kids were coming in, there was this like flare up within you because your logical brain wasn't operating at the time. It was fighting your more primal brain, but there was this back end part that was desperately trying to get you to remove yourself from that situation by any means.
Yes, exactly. Oh my gosh, that's so good. And as you're talking about understanding our brain, the biology, the neurobiology, how our brain works, what chemicals get released, and how you said it's a fifth of a second. I haven't heard that. That's insane. That's how quickly our bodies will physically respond, which is before we have words for it. Because so often we think that we're thinking creatures first when we're feeling creatures first. Our bodies intuitively know and feel before we have the language and the words for it. I can see how what you're talking about as well is like being like making the shift from basically judging ourselves and getting caught up in that trap, because I do think it's a trap it's so easy to fall into, but it keeps us stuck and from moving forward, but just continuing the same pattern. So shifting from judging ourselves to then getting curious and saying like, I'm curious about why. I'm curious about like, is this historical? Is this coming from somewhere else? Or what else was going on at the time and what else was coming up for me? I think it's really helpful to see just that one little shift is something that can make a difference of breaking out of that and then moving into and basically like new territory, new space. And it's little, even if it's one step, it's still a new territory we haven't been before, or it's being like, hey, I need to, trying to create new patterns and ways of operating when these things come up. So I'm really glad that you spoke to that. And it's making me curious more about the framework that you do use to help people. Because I'm thinking of some of these practical tools that can help when we do feel anger or prevent conflict from like escalating too much in the moment. And I know you have your framework. So if you could share a little bit about that, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a little fun fact, I created this framework as I was reflecting on and doing so much more of this inventory of the work that my husband had done. So as a little backstory, I got into anger management in an attempt to fix my husband. We would end up in these like really big fights. I would cling anxiously. He would bail avoidantly. Yeah. And I would emotionally punish internally. He would Hulk smash.
Yes.
Constantly. And at the time, he wasn't open to doing the work, and I was probably leading with a good amount of judgment. And so I, post-grad school, was like, all right, how can I like fix this man? And I went into anger management, right? So then I learned how big of a problem I was too. And so it really helped even the scales.
Shocking.
But, yes, it was very much actually. It was definitely not what I expected. So as I was doing this inventory over the last at that time, 3 years of his sobriety, I was trying to conceptualize what the pattern was, how we got from nearly separating, all of these things happening, Hulk smashing through walls, into more of a regulated, steady experience and relationship internally and externally. And what I came up with was the whole acronym is SHIFT. And so we start with self-awareness, we move into healing, we innovate, we build fortitude, and then ultimately transform. So to break those down a little bit more, is the self-awareness is understanding what sparked me, understanding what I'm envious that my children get that I didn't get, what came up for me in that moment, which one of my archetypes came up to protect me, where these things are coming from. And self-awareness isn't enough, as we know. That's where the gap between knowing better and doing better lives.
Yes.
So we lead with that self-awareness. We get curious about ourselves, and then we move into the healing. It's primarily healing from the bullshit, because it doesn't need years and years of therapy in order for us to experience these like micro heals. We just need to give ourselves permission to stop villainizing it. We stop focusing so much on the regret of the situation and so much more about what I could have done differently and what my anger was protecting.
Okay.
So if we were to take your example that this was about impeding goals, this was about overwhelming your boundaries, overstepping, things from your childhood that maybe rhymed with your adulthood now. And that's great. It's wonderful that you were introspective and you figured that out for yourself. And then what happens the next time this comes up?
Right. So that's going from...
So then we go from the self-awareness of it into a healing of it of, yes, I was snippy with my kids. Yes, they probably saw a version of me that wasn't the cutest one that I don't really want to repeat as often as I can prevent it. And what was that within me? And what did I desperately need in that moment? How can I lead with grace and compassion for myself? That, yeah, what I did with it was poor, sure. And what was that within me? How can I forgive myself? How can I allow myself to heal in that small moment of saying what I did with it was poor and the reason I did it was incredibly justified. And I can explain that part to myself.
Yes.
So if I can give myself enough forgiveness, I can then move on to the next phase, which is to innovate, to try something new and different. If I get stuck in between those two of knowing why I messed up and acknowledging that I messed up, and then the innovation becomes, I just won't do that. I won't get mad when they interrupt me. I won't say the wrong thing. I won't, curse at them when I'm just begging for them to brush their teeth at night, right?
Yeah.
It becomes so much more about what I won't do, and it lives within that anger management, hyper control kind of narrative.
Okay.
The innovation isn't the obvious, don't do that next time. The innovation is, what do I want to do instead? When we know that our brain, our nervous system is a pattern recognition, what new and different pattern can I give it to break it? What new and different experience or practice can I implement in order to break that pattern?
That's
that
really
becomes, instead of what I used to say was time, and then they get Mary Poppins the next morning until I just can't tolerate it. It's instead, okay, when I get angry next time, I will take a few seconds to remove myself. I will quite literally say, I will be right back, and I will lock myself in the next room until I can regulate. I will practice a single breathing exercise in real time. I know humming. I've learned humming is a really great thing. So next time I get angry with my kids, I will convert it into a song for us all to hum together. Right? It becomes so much more direction forward instead of just elimination, repression, suppression.
Wow. Control. That in itself, before even finishing the rest of the acronym, that in itself is so significant. And not just trying to eliminate it, because I feel like that's denial. It's not living in reality of how we work as humans. It's unrealistic expectations where we will inevitably fail and fall, because we can't just say we'll never feel that or we'll never feel that again. And so I love this, being able to think, like you said, the innovation part of like, what other ways can I handle this that are healthy, where I know what I will do, and the expectation is this will come up again. It will. And that's normal. But I can respond differently. And if we think in that innovative way, I can then have the foresight and almost like the planning part of like, now I know what I can try and what I can do. And if that still doesn't work for me, I'll try something else and continue.
And you're spot on. And here's where, unfortunately, we end up setting up impractical expectations for our kids for what they should expect from themselves growing up. And also what I proved myself a liar many, many times over. I said one thing and then I would do the other, because when I came back, when my rational, logical brain came back online, I did feel terrible. I did feel like I was capable of keeping my shit together the next time it happened. But that fifth of a second, that part is going to determine it for me before I'm even able to do it consciously.
So true.
So I constantly told my kids one thing and then behaved in another. The guilt and the shame almost immediately would become present in me. And instead of that being the gap that brought me back down, sometimes I would even double, triple, quadruple down, because it was like the anger in that moment was just so deeply flared up and built on top of that shame.
Yes.
And it becomes this whole big thing. And so our kids don't need Mary Poppins parents who don't lose it. They need parents who will acknowledge where they messed up and take the time in order to understand it more deeply, so that when we say, hey, next time will be different, I can actually give a reason why. I can let them know what to look for. Hey, next time I'm working on not getting loud when I'm upset with you. Next time I'm going to take some deep breaths. Maybe we can do it together. What kind of code word could we use together in order for both of us to remember that in the moment? And let's take some breaths together. It becomes so much more action oriented, and it breaks it down for them too, to be able to problem solve more creatively instead of just, sorry, I did that. It won't happen again.
Yes, exactly. And because too often, like, I think about friends of mine who grew up and they're like, yeah, my parent didn't have a hard time apologizing. He or she would say sorry all the time, but they couldn't trust it. It would constantly keep happening.
Yes.
And so I think it's really powerful too, to even having your kids be like, well, what will be different next time? Because that is the accountability piece. That is the part that we have a responsibility to say, that is on me to figure out what I need to do and what changes I'm working towards, so that this won't continue, or I won't react in the same way, but the same feelings will come up. I have healthier ways of dealing with it that don't get put on my kids, where they're taking the brunt of it. And the other thing I wanted to point out too is what I found really interesting in, it's so true of like what you're saying, how self-awareness in itself is not enough to create the change. And moving from the S to the H of healing, you've mentioned at least a couple of times I've noticed is like that. It's internal and external. So there's this internal, which I heard you say with the H. I need to acknowledge and forgive myself. Sounds like that's the internal piece. Yes. And we then can also make that external repair and acknowledgement. Then we move into the I of like, this is now what I know I will do different the next time, and try this and keep innovating and seeing what will work and help. But I just find that really helpful that you just clarified that.
It's trial and error. And the more that we can show our kids that we can try new and different things, maybe fail at multiple, but we're really just trying to find the right fit, we build that fortitude, which is our F.
Okay.
We not only build it within ourselves, we also model it for them. Of, hey, I thought that this would work. It really didn't. Mama kind of lost it, huh? Yeah, I know. Okay, I thought that would be helpful. It's not for me. It's my work to do, and I'm going to figure out what to do. But maybe next time we could try this instead, right? And over time, through the forgiveness of ourselves, through the innovation, through the trials that do end up succeeding, even if they're small successes, a 0 to a 10, we go from 0 to 9.8, and that's still progress. That's still something to be celebrated. Then I can build this mental fortitude. I can build this grit. That means that I can continue trying and over and over and over again. And even if I fail, I know I'm failing differently. And I can actually start hoping to fail fast, so I learn more quickly what works and what doesn't.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
And that becomes the fortitude. That becomes my ability to not shame myself so deeply and live within so much regret that I don't allow myself to actually move through it. That's where I lived. I did not know how to forgive myself, even if my kids did, because they just love me and they have no choice. But it was that part that I didn't know how to not keep replaying the really shameful ways that I would never want anyone to see me behave.
Yes.
And yet my kids saw me do that dozens of times.
Yes.
And it was really hard for me to get to that point of the forgiveness, of the grace, of the compassion without feeling like I was a cop-out. I was just giving myself that. And it's because I didn't know how to innovate. I didn't know how else to do it. And I didn't have the fortitude, the mental fortitude to allow myself to get to that point. Whereas, of course, I do now after years of this work. My boys are now 6 and nearly 9. So we've had some time.
Yeah.
But it is still new and different experiences bring up new and different triggers, and they flare up things that I thought were dormant. And it ends up having to be this whole cycle of new and different experiences to go through that shift framework until ultimately we are in this T of transformation. And I don't mean, I think the word transformation kind of unintentionally implies this like radical big transformation, but it's not. Everything that we do has to be so incremental, so small, those ripples that we talked about. Because if I can alter the way that I adjust, if I can adjust the way that I approach my frustration with my kids not brushing their teeth, clearly that's like a really big flare up for me.
I understand.
When it's the battle, man. It's a 2-minute task that takes 25.
Yes.
And it impedes something for me. And so it flares me up. And so if I can adjust the way that I handle that, if I can turn it into play instead of this really boring task, if I can get them these new toothbrushes we got that are supposed to be fun and we can count and we can do all of these things, I've already innovated through it. And then that one part of my day, the way that I handle that one part of my day has transformed. And so it really is like a constant work through the shift framework. It's so many different pieces that all add up into one really big one.
Oh my gosh, yes. That's a great way. I'm so glad you explained this. And I'm seeing how, even just what you shared at the end, this is a framework that you continually work through with each situation or thing that happens and that does come up. It's like, okay, I'm going to move through this, which it just helps so much because emotions are very messy. And when you have so many, with the emotion of anger, it's just so complicated. And I think it helps to break it down and simplify the way that we can navigate through those messy feelings and big emotions and situations more methodically and realize like this is a continual practice. And it's something that is worth counting every time that there is some improvement. It doesn't have to be dramatic or a wild and crazy shift and or transformation like you experienced or explained. Because I think for myself, like one of the bigger areas I've had to grow in is breaking out of the rigidity and the perfectionistic expectations of expecting myself to like hear this, learn about it, and then be able to implement it flawlessly, effortlessly, like from day one, and be like, and you know, it's like I shouldn't mess up. If I have this happen again, it's a big failure. And I've learned that progress, it is like really trying to count and focus those small steps and those small wins. To where I've had just like a coach help me and be like, at the end of the day, start counting and writing down and sharing with somebody 3 wins. It does not matter how small, just to start shifting your mindset and realize the rest of my life and what it is to be human. It's very messy. It is not, I'm not going to be perfect by any means. That's just such an absurd expectation of myself. And it's about the small incremental changes and progress, even in the midst of messing up. So I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And this framework is tremendously helpful. I can only imagine the clients that you work with. And I don't know if you do workshops or any other things like that, but just how impactful and helpful that would be. And it's something that's so practical that we can take with us into parenting. And literally, I can apply this today. I already know. So yeah, I'm very grateful for you sharing that and getting to be here and for the work that you do. So As we are coming to a close, can you just share where people can connect with you and what additional resources you do have? Like I heard you mention the quiz, which would be really helpful. Anything else that you'd like to share?
I appreciate you so much. And I think that when we're doing this work, again, there's just so much room for regret and adjusting those expectations, that sometimes the kind of pushback I get is that, okay, so you just want me to lower expectations, and I'm not a person who's ever going to have low expectations. And the counter argument there isn't to lower expectations. It's just to adjust them where they should have been in the first place.
That's so good.
Right. And like sometimes it does feel like I'm lowering the bar for myself. And if I just can't reach it, I just can't reach it. So let's get these small wins. Let's stack them up, build up that resilience, build up that ability for me to do that and empower myself to be able to do that. And then happily move it up the rung each and every time. Right. And there is so much of this expectation that we shouldn't. And that's back to full circle in the beginning. It was that bait and switch. You found out you're pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
Congratulations. It's amazing. It's going to be the greatest thing that's ever happened to you. La da da. And then the minute baby's here, it's like, well, you're in it now. And now you're here. Like, welcome. And it becomes this really big shift of like, I thought each moment was supposed to be the greatest moment. I didn't expect it to be this hard. No one warned me. Nobody told me it would be this hard. And it was so much of that like I externalized a lot of my anger for a while, which was like, how did nobody tell me? How did no one prepare me? And now I'm affecting my kids so poorly. Now I just want to run as far away as possible, but I know I won't do that, but I still desperately want to.
Oh my gosh.
And it becomes this really big internal battle that I'm anecdotally convinced, not a medical professional. I am convinced, though, that so much of my postpartum depression was created based on impractical expectations.
My gosh, yes.
That no doubt hormones came into play. No doubt other things were contributing. But more than anything, my expectation and my reality were so far apart that I felt robbed. I felt fumbled. I felt wronged deeply based on what society, friends, family had told me this would be like.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I completely relate to that. That is very similar to what my experience has been. And the hard part was I would enter into some of these mom circles and mom groups. And when I would open up and share about how hard it was, I was like met with crickets.
Same.
Yeah, and I remember being like, I guess it's just me. And it was very difficult. I remember being on the hunt, especially after my daughter was born, being there, where are the resources? Like the books, the people talking about how hard this is and how do I reclaim my life and find myself again? How do I navigate through all of this? Because there's just so much contradiction between, you said, the bait and switch at the very beginning of like, this is the best thing ever versus the reality of like, I'm severely struggling in so many ways and I don't know where I can find the help and support that I need. Nobody, I felt like, really was being honest about how hard it was because they were just so wrapped up in their own shame and guilt. And as a culture, that's what goes on so much. So I very much relate to that and needing to readjust and reevaluate. I think you use the word readjust, but like readjust those expectations to meet reality. But that's what I really appreciate these people like yourself who are creating a space to have these conversations and are willing to share the honest reality of how difficult this is and then provide the skills. You have done a lot of work yourself and taken your experience with your education and found created tools to be able to help people navigate through this, which is huge, 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 huge. So I'm really grateful for that.
And to piggyback, there was this part that when I finally, it took me a year to advocate for the depression that I was experiencing. And then I was met with oh, you poor little baby bird.
Yes.
I was the exception to this rule.
Oh my gosh.
And I just felt, it made me feel so gross and handled to where my approach now is yeah, it's horrific. Yes.
Yeah.
No. Like, come on. And this is absolutely atrocious. I thought this age was the worst. No. This next one is absolutely awful. Let me help you get through it. And it became so much more matter of fact that from being this forensic psychology prison system, court ordered, super boundaried, highly clinical human, into this. Now I market myself as a professional friend because that's what I'm doing. I use a ton of profanity. I share plenty of my experiences. It is so much like, yes, this is awful. Here's how we can find the joy within it. You are not alone. It is horrific. There are so many things that it's just absolutely like, it doesn't match and it's not fair and it's not okay. And here's how we can find the beauty in it. Here's how we can find the little moments that add up to really big, beautiful moments, because we're kind of tilting the scales by accepting all of it. Mm-hmm. We expect all of the good and we don't expect the bad, which is why our highs don't feel as high and our lows just bottom all the way out. Mm-hmm. And if we can even those scales with people like us who are sharing things very matter of fact, very much like, yes, this sucks. Yes, here's what you can do about it. Hey, yes, I've been there. Here's what I wish I would have done. And here's what I suggest that you do differently. It changes the entire thing. And so through, the quiz I have, that's 10 questions. It's super helpful. And then over into it's the Shift Live. So we meet every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific. And it's a live group where I teach. One week I teach, the next week we do a skills lab. So it's not just information, we actually implement. And I share all sorts of gnarly information there very transparently. My husband joins almost every time and shares his perspective. And we have so much more of this tribe, this community that so many of us are left without when our parenting experience just doesn't absorb into everyone else's in the way that we really wished it would.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is amazing. And with this group, is it open or is it a closed group and you like reopen it every so often?
It's open. Yeah. Okay, I always want people to know that they have a place to go. We do a 14-day free trial so they can get like at least one. Sometimes I postpone based on life, but they can get at least one experience in there and make sure that we're the people for them. And then it goes to $27 a month. I wanted a very low barrier to entry. It was free through most of last year. But the research is showing us that people commit to themselves when they attach themselves financially. And so I made it just a reasonably low monthly rate, just so that people know that they're not only investing financially in themselves, but they're also investing mentally, emotionally, spiritually in this as well.
Oh my gosh, I love that. I'm so glad that you're providing this, and having a group I feel like is so valuable to feel less alone and know that you aren't the only one. There are so many other people going through it, and getting to have you facilitate that and teach and lead in those ways. Oh my gosh, I just feel like it'd be very healing and therapeutic to get to be a part of that. So I'm glad you shared what resources you have available for anybody who finds themselves in these similar situations and needs that. So thank you. Thank you so much, Davina, for being here today and getting to have this conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I'm excited for whoever gets to listen to this, because I know it's going to help them, and just by what you've shared and just applying one thing, like it will truly help them in their daily life and in parenting and just show up better. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. It is truly my greatest honor. It's so wonderful to meet you, Jenna.
It's so good to meet you too. Well, if this conversation helped you today, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember that you are not alone. Thanks so much for listening, friend. I cannot wait to talk with you next time. Thanks for listening to Let's Get Real. If you've been feeling stretched thin, stuck in survival mode, or like you've lost yourself in motherhood, I made something just for you. It's called the Overwhelmed Mom's Guide, and it's totally free. Inside, I walk you through simple steps to help you reconnect with who you are, find a bit more breathing room in your day, and start to feel like you again. You can grab it now. Just click the link in the show notes. You don't have to keep doing this alone. Let's take the next step together.